Hello everyone, welcome to another late night stroll through the stranger corners of history. If you've found your way here, it's probably because your mind refuses to sleep. So let's give it something quietly absurd to chew on. Tonight we're gonna dive deep into how Romans actually helped cure insomnia, and just maybe we can learn a few things. Before we dive too deeply, a gentle nudge. If you enjoy stories that let you relax and learn at the same time, consider liking this video and subscribing to History at Bedtime. Also, feel free to leave a comment sharing your location and local time. We like to see history travel the globe alongside our viewers. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. The night breathes differently in Rome. It has a texture, soft, dense, like warm linen stretched over the city's bones. Beneath it, marble glows faintly under the moon, and the distant chatter of fountains mingles with the quiet thrum of 10,000 restless souls. If you listen closely, you can hear the sighs of a sleepless empire. Somewhere near the Palatine Hill, a senator lies awake, his mind turning like a wheel on its axle. Tomorrow's speeches, the emperor's temper, the rumors of plague. In the insulae below, the poor toss and turn, shifting on straw beds, their bodies sore from work and the heat that lingers even after sunset. And far beyond, in the fields outside the walls, shepherds hum lullabies to their flocks, counting stars instead of sheep. The Romans were many things: conquerors, engineers, philosophers, but good sleepers, not quite. They suffered from minds that would not hush, and bellies that burned with wine, and bodies too weary to rest. And so, from emperor to slave, they chased the same dream, the art of falling asleep. You'll hear of their curious remedies tonight, their herbs and rituals, their gods and midnight baths, each one a small window into the world that never fully closed its eyes. The first cure the Romans trusted wasn't found in a scroll or a physician's hands. It was in water. To them, the body was a furnace, always smouldering with life, and rest could only come when the flames cooled. So, when night fell, the Romans went to the thermae. Imagine it, a great stone bathhouse, still shimmering from the day's heat. Steam coils up like spirits. The air hums with the sound of dripping water and quiet laughter. You step inside, and the marble floor presses cool against your bare feet. The scent of olive oil and herbs clings to everything. Men and women alike ease themselves into the pools, first warm, then hot, then suddenly cold. The shift in temperature feels like a spell. Skin tingles, muscles soften, the pulse slows. They believed this ritual purged not just sweat, but anxiety. Balne somnum conciliant, one poet wrote. Baths invite sleep. When they emerge, glistening in lamplight, attendants rub their skin with perfumed oils, lavender, myrtle, sometimes even ground pearl mixed with honey. The body feels heavy, golden, serene. The city's noise fades to a dull hum. Those who could afford it drift home in silence, wrapped in linen sheets, their hearts steady. Others, the poor, the street sellers, the dock workers, sleep in doorways, trusting the night air to wash them clean instead. Above them all, the stars hang still, like the gods' slow, blinking eyes. Sleep For Rome was a sacred negotiation between body, soul, and city. And as the candles guttered low, even the insomniacs found a kind of rhythm, brief silence, dream. But not everyone trusted the water. Some sought gentler means, sweetness, warmth, and whispers of honey. In every Roman kitchen, there was honey, thick, golden, almost glowing, stored in clay jars sealed with wax. It was medicine, offering luxury and comfort all at once. For those who couldn't sleep, it became the empire's sweetest cure. In the poorer quarters, women heated goat's milk in bronze pots until it quivered just shy of boiling. Then came the honey, spoon after spoon, stirring slowly until the scent filled the room like sunlight. They believed honey carried the warmth of Apollo himself, the god who could soothe fever and fear alike. They drink it warm, standing barefoot on cool floors, whispering small charms to Somnus, the god of sleep. Somni, veni, sleep, come. Even physicians agreed. Pliny the Elder wrote that honey soothes the stomach and the spirit alike. To mix it with wine was to make mulsum, the Roman nightcap of choice. Too much, Galen warned, and the dreams would turn strange, vivid, chaotic, filled with marching soldiers and singing birds. But in moderation, it melted the day away like wax near a flame. Picture a Roman home at midnight. The walls are painted with faded vines and dancing figures. A single oil lamp burns, its flame bending low. Outside, a donkey brays. Inside, the air smells of honey and ash. You lift a cup to your lips. The warmth travels downward, spreading through your chest like calm itself. The straw mattress beneath you creaks as you settle in somewhere. A child murmurs in sleep. Rome quiets, inch by inch. Yet not all cures were so gentle. Some Romans sought help from the gods directly. With rituals so peculiar, they blurred the line between medicine and magic. In the temples of Asclepius, where snakes coiled at the feet of statues, the sleepless came to dream under sacred roofs. They lay on animal skins and waited for the god to visit them in slumber. And sometimes they swore he did. But that's a tale for another hour. The temple doors of Asclepius were never truly closed. Even at night, you could see the faint shimmer of oil lamps flickering between the columns, as if the god himself were pacing, waiting for another restless mortal to arrive. Those who suffered long nights came quietly. Merchants, soldiers, even noblewomen veiled in midnight blue. They brought offerings, a jar of honey, a strip of linen, a carving of a sleeping child. Inside, the air was cool and thick with incense. The marble floors smelled faintly of pine resin and old prayers. The priests guided visitors to lie down upon the temple floor, or rather on the skins of sacrificed animals laid out like woven clouds. This was incubatio, the sacred sleep. The idea was simple and strange. One must sleep in the presence of the god to be healed by him. So they would rest beneath the vaulted ceiling, the scent of myrrh in their lungs, the distant sound of a fountain trickling. Some claimed they could hear snakes moving softly through the shadows, harmless creatures kept in the temple as holy symbols of renewal. And then, in that half-dreaming haze, where consciousness thins, the miracle was said to happen. Asclepius would appear, not as a roaring deity, but as a physician dressed in white. He would touch their brow, whisper a word, and vanish before dawn. The next morning, the sleepless rose refreshed, or at least, that's what they told the priests. It didn't matter if the cure was divine or imagined in Rome, belief itself was medicine. Word spread quickly. If no draught or bath could still your mind, the god of healing might. Even emperors sought his grace. Marcus Aurelius, weary from endless campaigns and philosophy, was said to have spent nights in Asclepius' temples, asking not for victory, but for peace enough to close his eyes. And when the day broke over the marble steps, the sunlight always looked softer there, as though filtered through something unseen. But for those who couldn't travel to temples, there were humbler gods to call upon, household spirits, bedroom guardians, and one little deity who might just be your favorite by the time you hear his name. He was called Somnus, sleep himself, though the Romans whispered about him more than they prayed to him. They pictured him as a winged youth, drifting through windows like mist, his hair tangled with poppy petals. He carried no thunderbolts, no tridents, just a handful of dreams. They said his touch could quiet the loudest mind, his breath could cool the fever of thought. But Somnus was fickle. He came only to those who made their rooms ready for him. So Romans tried to lure him. They burned poppy seeds in small bronze bowls, watching the smoke curl and soften the air. They sprinkled lavender and crushed rose petals onto their pillows. Some laid out a cup of sweet wine on the windowsill, an offering in case Somnus passed by thirsty. Others whispered small invocations before closing their eyes. Come softly, come sweetly, come soon. In country homes, people placed small figurines of the god near the bed, carved from ivory or clay, always with closed eyes. A reminder that sleep, too, was a guest to be treated kindly. And it wasn't just Somnus they feared losing. His sons, the Waniveroi, spirits of dreams, drifted behind him, painting the night with visions. Morpheus shaped human figures in dreams. Phoebeta conjured beasts. Phantasus made the unreal glow. To offend their father was to invite only restless, shapeless sleep. To please him was to dream vividly of running rivers, of temples glowing gold, of loved ones smiling in impossible sunlight. Some Romans swore that when they slept peacefully, Somnus had touched their eyelids with poppy dust. When nightmares came, it meant he'd passed them by. So each evening, before the city's lamps were snuffed out, people performed small rituals, washing the feet, smoothing the linens, humming the same low tune their mothers once did. Tinny acts of invitation, gestures that said, the bed is ready, you may rest here now. And perhaps that's what the Romans knew better than most. Sleep isn't forced, it's courted. Outside, the city's last taverns close, the moon glides higher, steady and pale. You can almost feel Somnus brushing past the window, his wings made of silence. Somewhere, a baker begins his dough for morning bread. Another day waits, but not yet, not for a while. Tonight, we drift deeper into the herbs and potions the Romans brewed for rest. into the strange science of dreams written in scrolls and whispered through centuries. When the Roman sun slipped behind the hills and the streets turned silver under torchlight, another kind of market opened its eyes. It wasn't the grand Forum Romanum, where senators boasted and merchants shouted. No, this was quieter, hidden in the folds of alleyways, behind taverns and bakeries, where the air smelled faintly of fennel and fire. Here the herbalists worked. They were the city's whisperers, half healers, half dream weavers, selling small miracles in clay jars and tied pouches. Their stalls glimmered with strange greens and golds, dried myrtle leaves, powdered saffron, poppy resin, crushed lavender, sprigs of mint. Some remedies promised to mend wounds, others promised only a dreamless night. Sleep like a child, they'd say, shaking a jar of valerian root. Sleep like the dead, another would whisper with a grin, holding up a vial of poppy oil. Valerian was a favorite among the weary. It smelled sharp and earthy. Some called it the scent of old rain. Boiled into tea, it loosened the nerves and calmed the heart. Pliny wrote that it draws the restless into gentler motion. To drink, it was to feel the body grow heavy, the mind slow to a warm drift. Poppy, of course, was stronger. Its milky sap, scraped from the pods and dried, was stirred into wine or rubbed on temples. Too much, and it could still the heart. Too little, and it only teased sleep without delivering it. The line between cure and curse was thin, and the herbalists walked it like tightrope dancers. Some mixed their own blends, honey with myrtle, lavender with vinegar, mint with goat's milk. These concoctions smelled like gardens and funerals all at once. Bittersweet, old, sacred. Picture a woman at her stall, hair tied in a scarf, counting coins by lamplight. A man approaches, pale and sunken-eyed. Can't sleep, she asks. He nods, and she hands him a small sachet wrapped in linen. Boil it once, she murmurs, and breathe deep. The gods will take the rest. He walks away, the scent of herbs trailing behind him. For centuries, Rome trusted these secret healers more than doctors, because in the quiet of the night, it wasn't medicine they sold. It was mercy. As the lamps dim, the market fades. A single jar remains on the table, half full of dried petals. A moth flutters near it, drawn by the faint scent of something eternal, and the city exhales. If you ever stepped inside a Roman apothecary, you'd think you'd wandered into a library where every book smelled faintly of dust, oil, and heaven. Wooden shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Each jar was labelled in careful Latin: Papaver somniferum for poppy, Ruta gravare for rue, Melissa officinalis for balm. The apothecary's fingers were always stained yellow with herbs and red with wine. Here, sleep was a recipe. One draught began with hot water, a dash of malsum honey wine, crushed poppy seed, and a shaving of cinnamon. Another called for myrtle berries, steeped in vinegar, cooled, then mixed with rose oil, and drunk just before bed. For headaches that robbed rest, they made pastes of mint and olive oil to rub along the temples. For troubled dreams, a sprig of laurel was burned, its smoke said to chase away nightmares. Roman doctors often disagreed with these mixtures. Galen, stern and skeptical, warned that too many poppies dulled not just the senses, but the soul. Better, he said, to rest the body by moderation than to drug the mind into slumber. But the people preferred the apothecaries. They were closer to earth, less to philosophy. Their shops smelled of trust, warm and living, like the inside of an herb garden at dusk. There was even a superstition that if you wrote your worries on a slip of papyrus and burned it in a bowl of valerian smoke, the gods would forget them for you. Imagine the soft light of an oil lamp, the way the script curls and vanishes in grey wisps. Maybe that was sleep's first step, the act of letting go. Children, too, had their own cures. Mothers tied tiny pouches of herbs around their necks, filled with anise or chamomile, so their dreams would stay sweet. Some rubbed poppy oil on infants' foreheads, whispering prayers that sounded like songs. It wasn't science, it was tenderness. And tenderness, the Romans knew, had a way of quieting the world. Outside, the apothecary shutters his shop. The moonlight falls across the jars, turning every label into a silver whisper. The scent of balm lingers in the air, clean, calm, final. Sleep does not come all at once, even here, but it's close now, resting just beyond the door, waiting for you to close your eyes. For most Romans, sleep began long before the eyes closed. It was a ritual, a quiet ceremony repeated each evening as faithfully as prayer, in a civilization obsessed with order and rhythm. From the geometry of their gardens to the schedule of their baths, it made sense that even sleep followed its own sacred routine. The Roman word for bedroom was cubiculum, a simple word meaning a place to lie down. But as the empire matured, the cubiculum evolved into something far more symbolic. It became a sanctuary of privacy, a rare thing in the densely populated world of ancient Rome. For the wealthy, these rooms were small but deliberate. They were not sprawling chambers like those of later medieval lords. Romans preferred compact, quiet spaces. A patrician's cubiculum might be no larger than a modern dining room, with painted walls depicting serene landscapes, pastoral scenes, temples, and sleeping figures of gods. The floor would be tiled in mosaic, the furniture sparse, one bed, a small chest, a lampstand. In villas, bedrooms often faced inward, toward the courtyard, to muffle the city noise. Thick curtains made of wool or linen hung from the doorways, softening draughts and light. The beds themselves, called lecti, were surprisingly elegant. Their frames, often of bronze or carved wood, were strung with leather straps or woven cords that supported a mattress filled with straw, wool, or for the very rich feathers. Over this came blankets of dyed wool, sometimes with embroidered borders showing vines or mythological scenes. Archaeologists have found traces of these details in Pompeii and Herculaneum, faint impressions of linen threads, burn marks from oil lamps, fragments of wooden frames left behind when Vesuvius froze sea life in ash. One preserved bedroom in Herculaneum still shows a wall painting of Somnus, wings folded, hovering above a sleeping youth. It's a subtle reminder that even in a world of emperors and conquests, Romans cherished the simple act of rest. Before bed, cleanliness was a moral as much as a comfort. The evening bath was not just a luxury of the elite. Even modest citizens visited the public baths after sunset. The transition from the day's heat and dust into the cool stillness of night began with warm water and scented oil. The body was scrubbed, perfumed, and lightly massaged, a physical reset, preparing not just for rest, but for the peace that came with it. After bathing, Romans followed small domestic rituals that might seem strangely modern. Lamps were adjusted so that their flames burned low and steady, a single wick in a clay saucer of oil. Some placed bowls of water near the bed to catch dust and cool the air. Others scattered herbs, such as mint or rose petals, over the floor to sweeten the scent of the room. In larger households, servants brought warmed stones wrapped in cloth to slip under blankets during winter nights. Wealthier families sometimes owned silver hand warmers, shaped like small jars, which could be filled with glowing coals. The faint scent of smoke and iron mingled with lavender oil in the air, the smell of Roman night itself. There was etiquette, too. Guests were never shown to bedrooms. These were private spaces, sacred to the family. To enter uninvited was a breach of decorum, even among spouses. Romans often kept separate sleeping chambers, especially in the upper classes. Marriage was a public alliance, but sleep was private. And yet, despite all this care, insomnia haunted the empire. Writers mentioned it as both ailment and metaphor. Seneca the Younger described lying awake through long nights, his thoughts rattling like chains until dawn. Pliny the Elder blames sleeplessness on an excess of food or worry, the same cause in many physicians still cite today. Galen recommended a light meal, a walk after sunset, and silence before bed. Cicero admitted that political anxieties often kept him awake until the birds began to sing. Silence was rare in Rome, and that was part of the problem. The city hummed even after midnight. Watchmen patrolled the streets with staffs. Taverns spilled laughter and music. Carts rumbled over stone. The historian Juvenal complained that only the rich, with their villas outside the city, truly knew sleep. The rest were prisoners of noise. To counter it, people developed small tricks. Some burned laurel wood, believing its crackle frightened away evil spirits that caused nightmares. Others hung amulets above their beds, bits of coral, bronze charms shaped like eyes, or even fragments of text from Homer's Odyssey, thought to protect against bad dreams. Children were given little dolls to sleep with, which served both as toys and talismans. And then there were the prayers, not grand temple invocations, but quiet whispers at home. Romans spoke softly to the household gods, the Lares and Penates, asking them to keep the hearth safe through the night and to guard the dreams of those who slept nearby. Let us wake in peace. One inscription reads on a surviving household altar, "For the poor, sleep looked different. Their bedrooms were often shared, entire families in a single space, sometimes no larger than a stable." In Rome's tenement buildings, the insulae rooms were dim, smoky, and full of the scent of bread, sweat, and life. The beds were simple wooden frames or piles of straw on the floor. Curtains were rare, so was silence. People slept in shifts, depending on their work. Bakers rose before dawn. Watchmen returned at sunrise. Street cleaners worked through the small hours. Yet even there, rituals endured. A jug of water by the bed, a sprig of mint hung from the wall, a whispered wish for Somnus to pass by. The poorest Roman still shared with the emperor the same hope, that the body might surrender, that the mind might quiet, that the dark hours might be kind. There is a peculiar tenderness in how the Romans approached sleep, not as an escape, but as an art. Every gesture mattered, the arrangement of linens, the rhythm of the breath, the cooling of the room. Even in discomfort, there was intention, and it's worth remembering that in an age without electricity, the cycle of light and dark ruled all. Romans rose with the dawn and grew drowsy soon after sunset. The day belonged to labor, the night to reflection and restoration. Sleep, to them, was both a biological need and a moral act, a way of aligning the self with the order of the cosmos. When the household finally settled and the lamps dimmed to tiny golden eyes, the city changed character. The shouts from taverns softened, replaced by the murmuring of fountains and the rhythm of footsteps echoing on stone. The night, at last, belonged to those who dreamed. It is in this stillness that the next chapter of Roman insomnia unfolds, not in the household or the temple, but in the philosophies that try to explain why the mind refused to rest. For the Romans, sleeplessness was not merely a physical problem, it was a question of the soul. The Romans inherited their sleeplessness from the Greeks, and with it, a fascination for what happened inside the skull once consciousness slipped away. To them, the border between waking and dreaming was a frontier, a realm where gods spoke, the dead visited, and truth disguised itself in riddles. But while the common people burned herbs or whispered charms to lure sleep, Rome's philosophers tried to reason with it. The Stoics, ever practical, treated sleep as a natural rhythm, neither moral nor mystical. Seneca wrote that the wise man approached rest as he approached death, calmly, without fear. It is the rehearsal, he said, for that final, longer night. In his letters, he confessed to long hours of wakefulness spent thinking about the noise of the city and the weakness of the flesh, but he advised his readers to accept fatigue without resentment. The body, he wrote, is a servant when it tires. It asks for mercy. Grant it mercy. To Seneca, insomnia was not a curse. It was a teacher reminding the mind of its restlessness. Epicureans took another path. To them, sleeplessness came from imbalance. Too much fear, too much ambition, too much food or desire. The cure was simplicity. Lucretius, in his great poem De Rerum Natura, described the nightly collapse of the world. The earth grows silent, beasts lie still, and sleep descends upon weary men. Nature, he argued, invited sleep the way gravity pulls the body down. Resisting it meant resisting nature itself. A peaceful mind followed peaceful living. Light meals, moderate wine, friendship instead of politics. Platonists were more mystical. They saw dreams as the soul's conversation with the divine. To sleep was to let the rational mind step aside so the higher self could wander free. For them, the truly virtuous man prepared for bed as for a sacred audience, with cleaned body, quiet heart, and thoughts ordered toward the good. Roman medicine, borrowing heavily from Hippocrates, treated sleep as one of the body's vital functions. Its absence signaled disorder in the humors. The four internal fluids thought to govern health: blood, phlegm, mellow bile, and black bile. Galen devoted entire treatises to the subject. He noted that patients who studied or worried late into the night often heated their minds, making the blood rush upward and trapping the soul in the head. His prescription was elegantly simple: a walk after supper, a warm bath, a cool room, and the avoidance of vehement discourse before bed. He even described posture. One should lie on the right side first, so digestion could begin properly, then turn to the left once the stomach settled. Too soft a mattress weakened the muscles. Too hard a surface bruised the flesh. Balance in all things, he repeated, a phrase that could have been carved on the walls of any Roman bedroom. For more stubborn cases, Galen recommended poultices of lettuce seed, a plant the Romans associated with drowsiness, ever since the god Mercury was said to have offered it to weary Jupiter. Crushed and mixed with wine or oil, it served as a mild sedative. He also suggested the vapor of burning myrrh, claiming its aroma draws the senses gently downward. Modern readers might smile at such notions, but beneath them lies a remarkably modern intuition. Insomnia, even then, was recognized as both physical and emotional. It was not the absence of sleep, but the presence of unrest. While physicians measured, poets confessed. Ovid, in exile on the cold shores of the Black Sea, wrote that sleeplessness was his companion. Night is long when one remembers Rome. He imagined sleep as a capricious lover who visited others but not him. Propertius called the same god cruel, keeping him awake for thoughts of Cynthia. To these men, insomnia was not an illness. It was heartbreak made audible. Even Virgil, in the Aeneid, filled his nights with watchful heroes and restless queens, when Dido lies awake, consumed by love. Her chamber glows with firelight and memory. It is one of the earliest portraits of human sleeplessness written with such sympathy. Roman poets understood what medicine could not cure: the mind's refusal to obey reason when stirred by grief, ambition, or desire. Their insomnia was emotional geography, not pathology. Roman moralists used rest as a measure of virtue. To sleep well meant to live rightly. Cicero claimed that only the guilty were haunted at night. The just man sleeps in peace, the wicked in watchfulness. This idea filtered through sermons, household wisdom, and even children's lessons. Parents told stories of emperors who tossed in their beds after unjust acts, Caligula, who dreamed of the sea rising to drown him, Nero, who heard music in the dark that no one else could hear. In a culture where honor was public, sleep became the private courtroom of the conscience. When a man could not rest, he was said to be on trial within himself. Yet Romans also believed dreams could heal. Physicians recorded patients who found cures revealed to them in visions. Inscriptions from sanctuaries dedicated to Asclepius tell of men and women cured after dreaming of specific remedies, a certain herb, a bath, a prayer. Whether psychosomatic or divine hardly mattered. What counted was that belief brought relief. Galen, though cautious, accepted that the imagination influenced the body. He recounted a case of a man who dreamed nightly that a snake coiled around his chest and who awoke breathless. After confessing anxiety about debt, the symptoms vanished. The dream, Galen concluded, was the body translating the soul's burden into image. To the modern ear, that sounds strikingly like psychotherapy. 2,000 years ago, the Romans were already groping towards it in the language of gods and humors. Temples to Somnus himself were rare, but his imagery pervaded art. In sculpture, he appears youthful, reclining with wings sprouting from his temples. His attributes, a poppy, a horn, a branch of black poplar, symbolized oblivion and peace. Mosaics show him hovering over sleeping figures, sometimes with his sons, Morpheus, Phantasus, and Phoebeta. Somnus was both comfort and caution. Artists depicted him beside death, almost indistinguishable except for color. Death in pale marble, sleep in darker stone. The message was clear. Each night we die a little, and each morning we are reborn. That idea gave Insomnia an existential edge. To lose sleep was to flirt with imbalance between life and death. When the philosophers, poets, and physicians had said their part, what remained was the collective mood of the Roman night itself. It was not silence, but texture, distant footsteps, a dog barking on the Aventine, a vendor closing his stall, a fountain echoing through marble courtyards. Torches hissed in the breeze. In the Subura, lovers argued under balconies. In the Forum, guards shifted armor. In the Palatine Palace, an emperor dictated letters by lamplight. This was the environment of the Roman insomniac, a city alive even when its citizens longed for stillness. The poet Statius once wrote that the hardest part of sleeplessness was hearing the world continue without you. He imagined the baker kneading dough, the courier galloping through the gate, the sailors loading grain ships for Ostia, all while he lay awake, watching the lamplight fade. To hear life while waiting for sleep, he wrote, is to feel time itself pass over you. In those lines lies the universal heart of insomnia, unchanged since Rome. Awareness stretched too far into the night, the mind unwilling to surrender. And so, to counter this restlessness, Roman thinkers developed mental disciplines remarkably close to what modern psychologists call cognitive or meditative techniques. Seneca advised rehearsing gratitude before bed, listing silently the day's modest successes. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, wrote that he often reviewed the virtues of those he admired until sleep crept upon him as upon a child. Both practices aim to replace anxiety with reflection, to cool the mind's fever with order. They believed that if a man ended the day in harmony with reason, the body would follow. Sleep, then, was not conquered by force, but invited through peace of mind. 2,000 years later, the rhythm of their reasoning still hums beneath modern advice. Keep routines, avoid excess, quiet the mind. The Romans lacked our clocks, our caffeine, our blue light, but they understood the human condition. They saw insomnia as proof of the soul's complexity, a reminder that even in a world of baths, wine, and philosophy, the simplest act, closing one's eyes, remained a mystery. In their libraries and temples, their cramped apartments and marble villas, the people of Rome drifted between wakefulness and dream exactly as we do now. Their cures were half superstition, half wisdom, and all deeply human. And as another Roman night fell, the questions they asked about peace, guilt, memory, and the fragile art of letting go lingered like incense in the dark. In ancient Rome, the night had its own profession. When most of the city turned inward, dousing lamps and pulling curtains tight, another kind of worker began their quiet rounds. The physicians, the attendants, the midwives, and the healers who kept the sleepless company. They moved through marble villas and smoky tenements alike, the invisible custodians of the body's rest. The Roman physician was not simply a man with herbs and instruments. He was a presence within the home, often living with the family he served. In grand houses, he might have a small chamber near the entrance or courtyard, always within call. At night, if a master or mistress woke uneasy, stomach burning from a heavy meal, fever rising, or mind unsettled, the physician was summoned by a servant carrying a lamp. By lamplight, he examined the patient with gestures that look familiar even now, feeling the pulse at the wrist, observing the tongue, asking questions about dreams, about digestion, about thought. Sleep and appetite were considered twin barometers of health. If one failed, the other soon would. Physicians carried small wooden boxes filled with their tools, bronze scalpels, spatulas, cups for bloodletting, and above all, tiny vials of powders and resins. Inside were the ingredients of sleep: opium poppy, anise, mandrake, honey, and crushed pearl. They mixed their draughts on the spot, stirring powders into wine, muttering proportions by memory. 1 pinch to calm, 2 to silence, 3 to risk. But the physician's art was as much about presence as prescription. Galen himself insisted that tone of voice mattered. He wrote that the best doctor soothes as well as treats. He compared the healer to a singer whose calm melody could coax the heart's rhythm to match his own. Many Roman households took this literally. Some physicians were known to hum or recite verses while preparing medicine, the sound itself believed to lull the nerves. When the remedy was given, the lamp's flame was trimmed low. The patient was encouraged to lie on the right side, to breathe deeply, to listen to the dripping of water in the courtyard fountain. If anxiety persisted, the physician might suggest a story, not of gods or heroes, but of ordinary life: a shepherd finding his flock, a fisherman returning home, a woman grinding wheat at dawn. Stories were medicine too. The mind, Galen wrote, must be guided into gentler fields. While physicians tended to the wealthy, the midwives, the obstetresses, tended to everyone else. Their work did not end with childbirth. In many communities, they acted as local nurses, and night attendants, versed in herbs, bandages, and sympathy. When a mother couldn't sleep after delivery, they brewed infusions of fennel and dill. When an infant cried through the night, they rubbed poppy oil onto its feet and sang softly. One tablet, found in Osteorome's harbour city, bears a dedication from a grateful woman to Vitiamed's wife and guardian of peaceful nights. The inscription is simple, but it suggests something profound, that these women were recognized not just for saving lives, but for giving rest. In smaller homes, the midwife might sit through the dark hours beside the sick, refilling lamps, changing cloths, or whispering prayers. She carried her tools in a woven basket: linen, pins, small knives, a flask of vinegar, and always a pouch of herbs. Among them, a favourite for sleeplessness was biocyamus, henbane, used sparingly, for it dulled pain but courted danger. Mixed in tiny doses with wine and honey, it could bring long, dreamless rest. In excess, it brought hallucinations. There are records of midwives who knew this balance intimately. Inscriptions call them sagae, wise women. Some later generations dismissed them as witches, but in their own time they were part of the Roman fabric of care, respected, necessary, feared only by those who did not understand them. In every Roman home, even the humblest, the night did not belong entirely to silence. Household slaves, servi cubiculares, were responsible for their masters' comfort. They lit lamps, fetched water, adjusted blankets, massaged limbs. Their hands kept the rhythm of domestic life, even in darkness. To serve an insomniac was both burden and art. We know from letters and plays that masters often called attendants for conversation when they could not sleep. A slave might be ordered to read aloud, not from philosophy or politics, but from soft poetry, the pastoral verses of Theocritus, or the love elegies of Tibullus. The slow cadence of Latin, spoken in near whisper, was said to calm even the most restless senator. For wealthier citizens, specialized slaves known as lectis sterni or bed servants were trained specifically for night duty. They knew how to keep oil lamps from smoking, how to pour warm water without sound, how to press fingers gently along the shoulders to ease muscle tension. It was an unspoken therapy. In a society that prized stoicism, touch was a quiet language of care. Archaeological finds confirm this intimacy. Small bronze lamps shaped like hands or sleeping faces have been found in bedrooms, likely tended by such servants. One rare example bears an inscription scratched into the handle: Somnus favit domino meo, may sleep favor my master. It was not prayer for themselves, but for the one they served. Outside the homes of the elite, healing was public and improvisational. At the edges of the Forum and near the Circus Maximus, herb sellers set up before dusk with baskets of roots and powders. They offered quick fixes: a sip of lettuce water for sleeplessness, a pinch of rue against bad dreams, a small clay charm inscribed with the image of Somnus. Some carried signs promising somnum certum, sure sleep. The irony, of course, is that no one ever guaranteed it. Among these vendors were also performers, street doctors who mixed humor with medicine. They drew crowds with jokes, and offered miracle draughts made of wine and honey. Juvenal mocks them in his satires, but their popularity shows how desperate many were for rest. Insomnia, then as now, made customers of everyone. In Rome's military hospitals, the valetudinaria, sleeplessness took a different form. Soldiers returning from campaigns often suffered what ancient texts called pavor nocturnus, the terror of the night. They woke shouting from dreams of battle. Commanders reported men who refused to close their eyes for fear of seeing what they'd done. The standard treatment was order, dated discipline, and baths. Medics administered poppy juice diluted with vinegar, believing the sourness prevented corruption of the spirit. Soldiers were encouraged to sleep in groups so that no man faced the night alone. There are accounts of commanders pacing the barracks, speaking quietly until the sounds of breathing replaced the clatter of armor. Even in civilian hospitals, rare but real, the caretakers understood this. Patients were placed near fountains or flowing water to muffle noise. The sound of water became a form of therapy. One poet called it the music of forgetting. For most Romans, professional help cost dearly. A night visit from a physician might equal a week's wages for a laborer. The herbalists were cheaper but riskier, their remedies unregulated, their dosages uncertain. Thus, the poor relied on community, neighbors, family, the wisdom of midwives. Healing in their world was shared work. Letters from Egypt, written on papyrus, mention women exchanging recipes for sleep potions. Take the milk of a white goat and the leaves of the poppy, mix with honey and drink before sunset. These small domestic notes are the archaeology of compassion, proof that care was passed hand to hand. It's tempting to imagine these caretakers immune to their own fatigue, but evidence suggests otherwise. Inscriptions and epitaphs sometimes reveal the exhaustion behind their gentleness. One tombstone for a physician named Quintus Lucilius reads, "He watched over others, may he now sleep." Another, belonging to a midwife, carries a similar sentiment. She gave rest to mothers. May the earth give rest to her. Such lines remind us that the Roman night was shared between the sleepless and those who kept vigil beside them. Across the centuries, these figures, the physician with his lamp, the midwife with her basket, the servant with his steady hands, disappear into shadow, yet their influence lingers. The hospital nurse, the bedside reader, the counselor speaking softly at midnight, all are descendants of that Roman tradition of gentle vigilance. When we talk today of sleep hygiene, of comfort, of soothing environments, we echo their work. They were not scientists, but they understood something essential, that the cure for insomnia often begins not with medicine, but with presence. Someone nearby, awake until you are not. As dawn rose over the 7 hills, these healers would extinguish their lamps, step into courtyards, washed with pale light, and breathe the first scent of morning bread from the bakeries below. Their own eyes heavy now, they traded places with the city, the waking tending the sleeping preparing to wake. And so the rhythm of care continued, night after night, in an empire that never truly slept. Sleep in Rome was never entirely solitary. Even when the lamps were dimmed and the courtyards emptied of voices, the city remained a chorus of small sounds, creaking beams, whispering fountains, the rustle of linen as someone turned in bed. Within that soundscape, families made their own arrangements for rest, shaped by class, architecture, and habit. In the great domus of the elite, the pattern of night was almost ceremonial. After the final meal, the senna servants cleared the triclinium and swept perfumed water across the mosaic floors. Children were sent to bed first, guided to their small cubicula along corridors that smelled faintly of lamp oil and baked bread. Older members lingered in the peristyle garden, talking softly beneath vines, waiting for the air to cool. Sleep came in phases. Romans rarely slept through the entire night. The idea of an 8-hour block is modern. Instead, they followed what scholars call segmented sleep. After the first few hours of slumber, many awoke naturally in the middle of the night, a time they called the intervigilum. During this wakeful interlude, some prayed, some read, some tended small domestic tasks. Pliny the Younger mentions composing letters after midnight, while the city is quiet and my mind most obedient. Others simply talked. Archaeological graffiti from Pompeii records, affectionate nighttime exchanges, short messages scratched onto plaster. Are you awake? And the answer, yes, but almost dreaming. For children, bedtime was a gentle education in order. Nurses and mothers sang simple lullabies, many of which survive in fragments. One of the oldest begins, "Lala lala, sleep, my little one, wolves are far away." The rhyme was half spell, half comfort. In a world where wild animals still roamed the countryside and spirits were believed to hover near the cradle, the song became protection as much as melody. Infants were wrapped tightly in swaddling cloth, then rocked in small wooden cradles that squeaked softly when moved. Roman authors often mocked overindulgent parents who coddled children with too many blankets or lullabies, a sign, they said, of moral weakness. Yet every excavation of a family tomb tells the truth that literature hides. Parents mourned their children deeply, and the nightly act of soothing them to sleep was an act of love as old as civilization. Space-shaped intimacy. In poorer homes, families slept together for warmth and safety. Beds were wide, made of wood and straw, sometimes with planks nailed to the sides to keep blankets from sliding onto the floor. In winter, goatskins or heavy cloaks were added. Fires were dangerous in cramped rooms, so warmth came from bodies. Travelers describe entering such dwellings at night, a faint red glow from a single lamp, the smell of smoke and bread, children curled beside parents, an old woman muttering prayers to the household gods. These scenes repeat across the empire, from Britannia's damp cottages to Egypt's mud brick homes, a unity of fatigue that crossed language and province. Courtyards were the lungs of Roman houses. In the evening, before final rest, families gathered there for a last breath of open air. Some watered their small gardens. Some poured libations of wine to the Lares. One inscription from a villa near Tibur reads, "To the gods of the hearth we give silence and sleep." The wording suggests that rest itself was considered an offering, a sign of trust in divine protection. Neighbors, too, participated in the rhythm of night. Apartment buildings were dense. Voices carried easily through thin walls. It was common courtesy to lower one's voice after the first sleep. Juvenile complaints of tenants who argued at midnight, but others describe the comfort of hearing a familiar cough or laugh through the wall, proof that one was not alone. Community, even at rest, hummed through the bricks. Not everyone in the household slept at the same time. Cooks, guards, and bakers kept the nocturnal economy alive. In large estates, slaves took turns watching over fires, animals, and doors. The night watch, vigils, patrolled streets, sounding horns each few hours. Their presence, though meant for safety, added to the city's constant noise, reminding every insomniac that vigilance never ended. Within homes, some members embraced this divided rhythm. Elderly relatives often woke before dawn to pray or prepare offerings. Wives of merchants rose to count money or cut cloth by lamplight. For them, wakefulness was productive, even virtuous. To lie abed too long invited accusations of laziness. Despite doctors and temples, most Roman cures for sleeplessness began in the kitchen. Family recipes passed down generations combined the practical with the superstitious. Warm milk with honey was universal, but so was a bowl of lettuce boiled in water. The mild narcotic effect of the plant genuinely helped. Some burned bay leaves and inhaled the smoke. Others placed sprigs of rosemary near pillows to purify the air. One writer mentions placing a bronze mirror under the bed to reflect away bad dreams. It was less medicine than metaphor, yet it speaks to how Romans visualized the mind, a reflective surface easily clouded. Before bed, a prayer might be said aloud. Common formulae survive on household amulets. May Somnus come with gentle feet. Another reads, let my dreams be clean. Such words blur the line between faith and psychology. By speaking them, one unburdened thought. For Romans, the household was a miniature state, ruled by its paterfamilias. His authority extended into the night. He decided when lamps were extinguished, when servants could retire, when silence should fall. Yet, in many letters and diaries, we glimpse tenderness breaking through hierarchy. A father noting his child's sleep, a wife describing her husband's habit of counting stars from the window before bed. Sleep softened the rigid outlines of Roman social order. In the dim light of night, master and slave, parent and child, philosopher and laborer all pursued the same fragile goal, surrender. Writers of household manuals, like Varro and Columella, considered sleep part of good management. They advised arranging rooms so that bedrooms faced east, catching the morning sun, but sheltered from street noise. They warned against overfilling the stomach at dinner and recommended avoiding disputes after sunset, for the tongue keeps the mind awake. These texts may seem mundane, yet they reveal a civilization that viewed tranquility as discipline. Peace was engineered through architecture, etiquette, and habit. Modern life divides day and night sharply. For the Romans, the transition was porous. The household at rest was still alive with maintenance. Lamps refilled, bread rising, floors cooling. To them, night was not the end of activity, but its inversion, a time when inner life replaced public life. Those who suffered wakefulness often turned to reflection, journaling, or quiet prayer. In a world lit only by flame, thought itself became a kind of light. Archaeologists have recovered tiny traces of these nocturnal rituals, bits of burned laurel near bedchambers, cups still sticky with honeyed wine, small bells meant to ward off bad dreams. Each fragment speaks of the same instinct, to make the dark gentle, to transform necessary rest into chosen peace. When we imagine ancient Rome, we picture noise and marble, conquest and spectacle, but most of its history happened in silence, under roofs, in the breathing rhythm of families seeking sleep. Their nights stretched like hours, too long when troubled, too short when sweet. The empire may have been vast, but every Roman, from emperor to baker's child, faced the same humble negotiation each evening: how to quiet the mind enough to let the world disappear. And so, across centuries, the Roman night continues, not in ruins or triumphal arches, but in the universal act of closing one's eyes and hoping for rest. When the private lamps went out, the city of Rome itself began to breathe differently. The darkness did not bring silence so much as transformation. What had been a marketplace by day became a whispering sea of shadows by night. The sound of sandals on stone replaced the cries of merchants, and the torches of the night watch flickered like drifting stars through the streets. Night in Rome was a landscape of contrasts. In the great forums, marble statues gleamed under the moon like ghosts of the Republic, their eyes blank and unblinking. Fountains murmured softly, spilling water that caught the light like liquid glass. Yet, only a few streets away, the Suburra, the crowded district of tenements and taverns, pulsed with life. There, night was not for sleeping, it was for drinking, singing, arguing, and forgetting. The Romans never truly conquered the dark. They managed it. Oil lamps and resin torches threw small islands of light into the gloom. But beyond their circles lay mystery. The smell of smoke and wine lingered in the air. Cats prowled between amphorae, chasing rats along the walls. The laughter of a group of revelers echoed briefly, then vanished into the stillness. For the insomniac, this was both comfort and torment. The knowledge that others were awake, that the world did not rest, even when one's own body begged for stillness. Festivals often spilled into the late hours. During Saturnalia, the air itself seemed to shimmer with noise. Songs, dice games, and toasts to Saturn and freedom echoed until dawn. For those who struggled to sleep, such celebrations blurred into restless nights filled with music and torchlight. The city's schedule obeyed no one rhythm. It beat like a heart, irregular and eternal. Even the priests who guarded the sacred fires of Vesta tended their duties at all hours, feeding the flames that were never allowed to die. For the wealthy, sleeplessness could be hidden inside thick walls. For the poor, it was shared. The tenants of the insulae often lay awake together, listening to the sounds that climbed up from the alleys, the crack of pottery, the clatter of hooves, the occasional shout. They talked quietly, exchanging complaints about landlords, prices, or the weather. Sometimes they sang to fill the silence between them. There are scraps of graffiti that suggest lullabies or jokes etched into plaster. Sleep avoids me again. Perhaps he has a better bed. At the city's edges, far from the noise of the center, travelers, inns remained awake through the night. The smell of stew and sour wine drifted into the cold air. Innkeepers, Saturday by the doorway, eyes heavy but watchful, while muleteers argued in slurred voices about routes and pay. Fires crackled in courtyards, and the restless lay, staring at the embers, watching them fade and flare. The Romans had no clocks, yet they knew time's slow passage through the colour of the sky and the cooling of the coals. Not all sleeplessness was human. The city itself made noises that kept its inhabitants alert. Wooden beams contracted in the cold. Dogs barked at unseen things. Pigeons shifted under eaves. In the Tiber's slow current, water slapped against wharves, and the chains of moored ships rattled softly. Even the aqueducts hummed faintly as water moved through stone channels. These were the lullabies of the empire, mechanical, endless, oddly soothing. Yet, for many, night was a time of work. Bakers began kneading dough before the first light. Their ovens glowed red behind shutters, releasing waves of heat that steamed against the cold. Street cleaners swept the paving stones, collecting the day's dust. Couriers prepared for journeys, strapping messages to their belts. Prostitutes took their posts in doorways or beneath arcades, their eyes catching torchlight like glass. They, too, were part of Rome's nocturnal economy, witnesses to a city that traded sleep for survival. Philosophers sometimes walked at night. Seneca describes pacing his courtyard beneath the stars, thinking through moral arguments. As dogs barked distantly, the rhythm of footsteps against stone was to him a form of meditation. He observed how the constellations moved above the city like gears in a cosmic clock. The heavens slept, he wrote, but only in appearance. Beneath that stillness was eternal motion. Perhaps that was why true sleep eluded men like him. Their minds were tuned to the motion of things that never rested. For others, the dark hours carried fear. Robbers and drunks haunted the alleys, and many Romans feared spirits that roamed the earth at night. Tales of lemures, restless dead, who slipped into homes to trouble the living, circulated widely. Families placed offerings of beans or coins at their doorsteps during certain festivals to appease them. Those who awoke suddenly at midnight might whisper a quick charm or touch iron, believing it kept away harm. To be awake when others slept was to stand on the edge of the visible and invisible worlds. But insomnia also fostered reflection. Poets and letter writers describe the hush of early morning, the final hour before dawn, as a time of revelation. Cicero claimed his best ideas came in that quiet between the dreams of others. In those hours, a candle burned on his desk, its flame trembling as though unsure whether to live or die. The wax melted slowly onto the table. Outside, roosters called from distant courtyards, and the first carts began to roll. The sleepless, by then, felt both privileged and cursed. witnesses to a secret part of the day most people never saw. When sleep refused to come, some sought distraction. Dice games were common. The soft click of ivory cubes against wood marked countless late hours. Others walked to public baths that stayed open through the night, their steamy interiors glowing orange with torchlight. Inside, the water was warm, the air perfumed with oil and sweat, men soaked in silence, their heads resting against the edge of the pool. Some eventually denseed off there, lulled by heat and the low murmur of attendants moving through the shadows. Women, too, had their own rituals for sleeplessness. In household writings from Pompeii, recipes appear in the margins, small, personal notes to calm the heart. Soak the feet in warm wine. Another, boil roses in milk. Breathe their scent and close the eyes. These instructions are domestic archaeology, fragments of the ancient equivalent of advice columns. They show that restlessness was shared, discussed, and gently tended, never dismissed as weakness. At times, sleeplessness became a motif in art itself. Wall paintings show figures reclining under trees, half awake, surrounded by symbols of twilight, owls, poppies, the fading sun. Sculptors carved reliefs of women holding torches in one hand and poppy flowers in the other. Wakefulness and sleep intertwined, even in marble. The Romans admitted that one could not exist without the other. There were also those who deliberately stayed awake for worship. In certain mystery cults, initiates kept vigil until dawn as a sign of devotion. The sleepless night became purification, the absence of rest, a gateway to divine vision, to spend an entire night awake, fasting and chanting was believed to open the inner eye. The line between insomnia and enlightenment blurred. For some, what others called suffering was a form of sacred discipline. And then came the dawn, sudden and golden. The light poured between the rooftops, cutting through mist rising from the river. Roosters crowed again, louder now, and shutters opened one by one. Vendors rolled carts into the streets, shouting prices for bread, figs, and olives. The city exhaled. Those who had slept stirred slowly, those who had not felt a peculiar relief. There was comfort in daylight, even for the weary. The darkness had not swallowed them. Another night had passed, and Rome, tireless, breathing, alive, continued as always. Somewhere a servant extinguished the last lamp, the wick curling into smoke. A poet set down his stylus, satisfied with a final line written while the world drowsed. A baker pulled loaves from the oven, their crusts cracking softly. The cycle resumed. For every Roman who closed their eyes, another opened theirs. The city's insomnia was not failure, it was function. The empire itself never truly rested, because its heart, its people, beat in overlapping shifts of wakefulness. As the morning light climbed the columns of the temples, the shadows shrank and the traces of the night dissolved. The dreams, the fears, the thoughts that had wandered in darkness retreated, making room for noise and business. But the memory of those hours remained in the body, the weight behind the eyes, the faint ache of thought stretched too long. They would speak of it later, perhaps over wine or in letters, as though night itself were a conversation partner that could be revisited. In every age of Rome, from the Republic to the Empire's fall, that rhythm persisted. The day conquered the night, but only until evening came again, and the cycle returned. Lamps, whispers, prayers, insomnia, and the slow surrender of consciousness. The city slept in fragments, and so did its people. And for the healers, poets, laborers, and wanderers who lived within its walls, that endless alternation between rest and waking became its own kind of harmony, the music of an empire that never ceased to dream, even when it could not sleep. Sleep and death were always close companions in the Roman imagination. To the poets, they were brothers born of the same mother. Night and their kinship was treated with both reverence and caution. Every time a Roman closed his eyes, he rehearsed, however faintly, that final surrender. The comparison was not morbid, it was philosophical. Death was the great equalizer, and sleep its gentle rehearsal. This belief shaped everything from bedtime rituals to burial customs. Before lying down, many Romans muttered small invocations that sounded more like farewells than prayers. May I wake, and if not, may my name be remembered. It was a quiet acknowledgement that sleep was never guaranteed. The world of dreams was a threshold, and stepping across it meant trusting the gods to bring one back. The imagery appeared everywhere. In tomb reliefs, the dead are shown reclining on couches, holding cups of wine as if still at a banquet. The transition from dinner to death to sleep was seamless, part of the same rhythm of release. Even the word requise meant both rest and repose in death. On gravestones, it was written simply, Reconset in pace, rest in peace, a phrase that began as a description of nightly sleep and only later became the language of eternity. Philosophers took the connection further. Lucretius argued that to fear death was to misunderstand sleep. Each night we die a little, he wrote, and yet we return. For him, insomnia was not just discomfort, but rebellion against nature, a refusal to trust the same oblivion that restored the world each dawn. Stoics like Seneca agreed, urging acceptance. To lie awake, fretting, was to fight the inevitable. The wise man, he said, should embrace both sleep and death with equal calm, for both were part of the universe's design. Yet, that serenity was easier in theory than in practice. Romans lived with death as a constant presence. Plague, war, childbirth, accident. The streets themselves were reminders, lined with tombs and memorials. When sleep refused to come, it was not uncommon for the mind to drift toward those absences. Letters from widows and parents speak of sleepless nights haunted by memory, the weight of loss pressing against the chest. The bed remembers, one woman wrote, after husband's death. It lies cold where he once was warm. The Romans feared bad dreams almost as much as death itself. They believed that the dead could visit the living through dreams, not as ghosts in the physical sense, but as echoes of spirit. A good dream of the departed was a blessing. A frightening one demanded ritual cleansing, Small offerings of milk or flowers were placed at household shrines to soothe the wandering souls. Insomnia in that world was not merely restlessness, but sometimes guilt, the sense that one had neglected the proper honors for the dead. Dream interpreters thrived on such anxieties. In every large city, one could find them near markets or temples, ready to explain visions seen in the night. Their manuals listed thousands of symbols. To dream of water meant change, of a snake renewal, to see the dead remembrance. For a fee, they offered reassurance or warning. A sleepless man might visit them at dawn, describing the flickering images that had refused to leave his mind. They listened, nodded, and prescribed acts of atonement, burn incense, pour wine, recite a hymn. It was therapy in the language of faith. But not all dreams were feared. The cult of Asclepius had already taught Romans that healing could come through visions. Those who slept in the god's temple sometimes awoke, claiming to have been touched, instructed, or simply comforted. Stories circulated of the blind regaining sight, of pain lifting, of hearts calmed. Whether miracles or placebo, these tales reinforced a quiet truth. Belief itself was medicinal. To dream of peace was to feel it, even briefly. The poets used this terrain with tenderness. Virgil wrote that in dreams, souls in the underworld revisited the living, pale forms that seemed to speak. Ovid describes sleep as a kingdom of shadows where somnus reigned from a cave lined with poppies. There, no cock crowed, no hound barked, and even the light was gentle. The imagery soothed as much as it unsettled. In their verses, sleep was not the enemy of life, but its softer twin, holding the same mystery with less finality. For ordinary Romans, these ideas shaped behavior in subtle ways. Beds were placed away from doors, symbolically distanced from thresholds that led to death. Pillows were sometimes embroidered with protective motifs, dolphins, wings, or ivy leaves. Poppies, sacred to both sleep and mortality, were painted on bedroom walls, a quiet reminder that rest and release were intertwined. Families visiting tombs brought garlands not only to honor the dead, but to ask for peaceful sleep themselves. The cycle of care went both ways. Insomnia therefore carried moral weight. To sleep poorly was to live out of harmony with the cosmos. When an emperor boasted of sleepless vigilance, as Augustus sometimes did, moralists frowned. Constant wakefulness was admirable in war, but unnatural in peace. Conversely, excessive sleep signaled decadence. Between those extremes lay the ideal Roman night, measured, serene, an echo of the universe's own rhythm of motion and stillness. The philosophers debated whether the soul itself slept. Some argued that during rest, the rational part withdrew, leaving only the senses adrift. Others believed that sleep allowed the divine spark within to wander among the stars. In this view, dreams were memories of that celestial journey, distorted recollections of wisdom glimpsed beyond the body. To sleep was to commune with the eternal, even if one remembered nothing of it upon waking. Such thoughts lent a strange dignity to bedtime. Closing one's eyes became an act of faith, not merely in biology, but in the order of the world. The insomniac trapped between reason and instinct, stood at the border of both. It is no wonder that so many sought help through ritual rather than medicine. The cure for sleeplessness, they believed, was reconciliation with the gods, with the dead, with oneself. In the darker hours, when torches burned low and the air thickened with chill, people whispered small verses to steady themselves. One fragment, found scratched onto a wall near Pompeii, reads, "Night, be kind, I have done no wrong today." It is the voice of someone ordinary, a craftsman, perhaps, addressing the unseen forces that governed his rest. The line carries no fear, only weary negotiation, the ancient acknowledgement that peace is a gift, not a possession. As dawn approached, the boundary between sleep and death blurred once more. Romans often said the dying fell asleep, and those who died quietly were praised for having met death as gently as Somnus himself. The metaphor comforted the living to imagine the final breath as merely another night, from which perhaps there might be awakening elsewhere. Even tomb inscriptions adopted the language of bedtime. He has gone to rest. She sleeps in the arms of the gods. The city's necropolises, lying just beyond its gates, mirrored this serenity. Rows of tombs lined the roads like sleeping figures, their stone faces turned toward the morning sun. Travelers passed them daily, reading names, nodding in respect. To walk among them was to pass through a silent neighborhood of perpetual slumber. The Romans did not hide death from daily life. They folded it gently into their understanding of existence, the way night folds into day. For the restless, this awareness could be both balm and burden. To lie awake, staring into darkness, was to feel how thin the veil truly was. Some found comfort in it, a reminder that nothing lasted forever, not even wakefulness. Others found only unease. Yet, out of that unease grew art, philosophy, and the peculiar tenderness of a civilization that saw beauty even in endings. When modern readers imagine Rome, they picture marble gleaming under sunlight, armies marching, voices raised in forum debate. But Rome also lived in the quiet between heartbeats, in the long hush of night, where individuals confronted the vastness of their thoughts. The empire's monuments may have crumbled, but its insomniacs speak to us still, their letters and verses whispering across centuries about the same small fears that visit every bedside. To read them is to recognize ourselves, the mind that will not rest, the heart that drifts between memory and worry, the body that aches for surrender. The Romans named these sensations, ritualized them, even turned them into poetry. In doing so, they transformed sleeplessness from a private torment into a shared human condition, one that stretched from the Palatine Hill to every corner of the empire, wherever a lamp burned against the dark. And when the final light faded, when the night deepened towards silence, the people of Rome would do what we still do now: take a slow breath, close their eyes, and hope that this time Somnus would come swiftly, carrying them past fear and thought into the vast, quiet realm where all empires and all souls must finally rest. Evening in Rome began with appetite. Long before the world darkened, cooks lit their fires, and the scent of olive oil and smoke curled through courtyards and streets. The Roman day revolved around its final meal, the cena, and what was eaten, when, and how often determined far more than simple nourishment. It shaped the rhythm of the body, the turning of the mind, and the quality of sleep that followed. The Romans understood this intuitively. What one consumed before bed could invite peace or summon torment. Dinner was both performance and necessity. In wealthy houses, guests reclined on couches arranged around low tables, their bodies already half at rest. The meal unfolded slowly, a sequence of contrasts. Salty olives followed by sweet dates, hot lentils cooled with cucumbers, roasted meats chased by chilled fruits. Servants moved silently through the room, pouring wine into cups, wiping the tables with cloths dipped in rosewater. Lamps glowed against painted walls, casting the diners' shadows onto scenes of myth and garden. Conversation drifted between philosophy and gossip, the murmuring of voices mingling with the soft sound of music from the next room. To eat like this was to prepare the senses for gentleness. The body sank towards stillness, even as the evening unfolded. Moderation was everything. Physicians like Galen insisted that excess food warms the blood and excites the humors, driving sleep away. A light stomach made for tranquil dreams. A heavy one invited nightmares. Romans believed that certain foods carried their own energies. Lettuce cooled the spirit, chickpeas enlivened it, onions ignited the blood. Fish was gentle on the body, pork heavy, cheese unpredictable. After dinner, most avoided fruit soaked in wine or spiced with pepper, fearing it stirred the stomach. Instead, they ended with honey, nuts, and small cakes made of barley. The sweetness soothed, signaling the close of the day. For common citizens, meals were humbler, but guided by the same instinct for balance. Bread, beans, and porridge formed the nightly fare. Wine was diluted with water, often flavored with herbs. Even laborers, though their portions were modest, understood that too much wine spoiled sleep. Inscriptions found in taverns warn of its cost. Drink to dream, not to drown. The idea that alcohol both invites and disturbs rest was already old. A cup or two might quiet the mind, but more brought feverish dreams, the kind that left the sleeper exhausted by morning. The Romans did not know the science of metabolism, but they knew its effects. Some used drink intentionally. Mulsum honeyed wine was the favored sedative of its age. It tasted like sunlight trapped in glass, golden and smooth. Recipes varied. Some added saffron for color, others thyme or pepper. It was drunk warm in winter, cool in summer, and always in small amounts. Physicians prescribed it to the anxious, the grief-stricken, and those recovering from fever. Honey itself was considered medicinal, capable of softening the interior. The sweetness, they believed, traveled directly to the heart, making it slow its pace. Other nightcaps were stranger. Lettuce juice mixed with vinegar was said to cool the fire of thought. Poppy seeds crushed into milk were taken by those desperate for oblivion. One recipe calls for soaking fresh roses in wine, straining the liquid and sipping it just before bed to refresh the senses. and invite mild dreams. The language of these old prescriptions reads like poetry, each ingredient both symbol and substance. To drink roses was to sip calm, to consume beauty in liquid form. The Romans saw digestion as a sacred process, a collaboration between body and cosmos. Food carried the qualities of the world: warmth, moisture, dryness, and balance among them meant health. Sleep was nature's way of finishing the meal. If one ate wrongly, the body rebelled through restlessness. If one ate wisely, sleep completed what the cook began. The dining couch and the bed were cousins, both designed for repose. After dinner, guests reclined not upright, but sideways, easing the transition towards drowsiness. Many fell asleep exactly where they ate, servants later guiding them gently to bed. The poor followed the same principle in their own way. After long days of labor, their supper was brief but satisfying. Lentils stewed with garlic, bread dipped in oil, a handful of dried figs. The heat of the hearth faded as they ate. Families shared a single bowl, talking softly while shadows moved along the walls. Children nodded off mid-bite, heads resting against a parent's arm. There was no separation between dining and sleeping. Both happened in the same space, the same air scented with smoke and humanity. In such moments, food was comfort, not indulgence. Season mattered here too. In winter, meals were heavier, meant to anchor the body. In summer, they turned cool and light, made of greens and soft cheeses. Pliny the Elder praised barley soup as a remedy for insomnia, claiming that its slow warmth carries heaviness to the limbs. Others trusted porridge, mixed with honey and poppy, a peasant's potion that would, by modern measure, indeed induce sleep. Wine diluted with water from a cold spring was another favorite, taken with a whispered prayer to Somnus before extinguishing the lamp. Beyond nourishment, food carried meaning. A meal at day's end was also an act of gratitude, a thanksgiving for survival, for labor completed. Romans offered small portions to their household gods before eating: crumbs, fruit, a splash of wine. These offerings were left overnight, the scent rising toward the divine while the family slept. If the food remained undisturbed by morning, it was a good omen. If ants or mice had found it, one repeated the ritual. Peace of stomach and peace of spirit were inseparable. In some homes, slaves known as structor specialized in arranging the meal to promote calm. They balanced hot and cold dishes, alternating textures and aromas, so that the senses would end neither excited nor dulled. Their skill was valued not only for taste, but for tranquility. To host a dinner that ended in quiet contentment was to show mastery over body and soul. The phrase cena perfecta, the perfect meal, meant not fullness, but harmony. After eating, many walked in their gardens or along the porticos. The physicians advised gentle movement to stir the humors and ease digestion. Couples strolled hand in hand, servants following at a distance with lamps. The cool air, the scent of flowers, the steady sound of sandals against stone. These were as much part of the meal as the food itself. When they returned indoors, they washed hands and faces, rubbed a little oil on the temples, and lay down. The boundary between dinner and dream was porous. The same flame that lit the table later glowed beside the bed. Not all followed moderation. The late empire was full of excess, banquets that stretched to midnight, courses of peacock and dormice, fountains flowing with wine. Satirists condemned these feasts as moral decay, but they also observed their consequence, a sleepless elite, haunted by indigestion and conscience alike. The poet Persius described the groans of wealthy men turning restlessly on couches, their beds crowded with ghosts of their own gluttony. Physicians could only shake their heads. For every cure they offered, appetite supplied a new illness. Yet the humble persisted in their wisdom. Eat early, they said, drink lightly, thank the gods, breathe the night air, let the body cool before lying down. In these simple habits lay the core of Roman health. Sleep was not conquered, it was courted, and food, when chosen carefully, was its most reliable messenger. As the lamps dimmed across the city, bellies full and spirits softened, Rome itself seemed to exhale. From the Palatine to the Suburra, from marble villas to smoky kitchens, the scent of bread and wine mingled with night air. Somewhere, a physician wrote another recipe, another prayer to Somnus. Somewhere else, a mother whispered an old refrain. Eat well, sleep deep, and above them all, the stars looked down on a city that understood, perhaps better than we do now, that rest begins not in the mind, but at the table. Roman medicine understood the body as a conversation between elements, warmth and cold, dryness and moisture, fullness and emptiness. Each spoke through the flesh and the mind. When those voices fell out of harmony, sleeplessness followed. The idea seems primitive to us, but it captured something we still recognize, that rest depends on balance, not just in the stomach or muscles, but in the unseen field of thought. Physicians began their inquiries with the tangible. They studied the color of the tongue, the pulse of the wrist, the scent of the breath. They felt the temperature of the skin and listened to breathing patterns. A patient who tossed and sighed at night was said to have heated blood or wandering vapors. Treatments aimed to cool, to ground, to still. One might be prescribed lettuce juice, a compress of violet petals, or a walk in moonlight. Another might be bled from the arm, or given a small draught of diluted wine. These remedies seem strange now, but they show a truth. Insomnia was not yet separated from emotion. The doctor treated body and soul as one. The most sophisticated among them, Galen foremost, saw the mind as both culprit and cure. He observed that patients who brooded on grief or ambition rarely slept, even when physically healthy. He called this perturbatio animi, the disturbance of the soul. His advice could have been written yesterday. Avoid argument after sunset. Do not read matters that provoke anger. Do not drink heavily or eat late. Think on something gentle before lying down. He even recommended imagining peaceful landscapes, gardens, rivers, open fields, so that the mind might rest in images of order. It was an early form of guided meditation, though he would never have called it that. The philosophers, meanwhile, examined the inner mechanics of wakefulness. Stoics believed that anxiety came from resisting the natural flow of events. To lie awake worrying was to reject fate. The cure was acceptance. Epicureans proposed detachment, arguing that most fears, death, poverty, disgrace, were illusions. Sleep would come when one ceased to grasp at control. These teachings reached far beyond the schools. Their language trickled into daily speech, shaping the way ordinary Romans described their nights. To say, "I cannot sleep" often meant, "I cannot let go." Dreams held diagnostic value. A patient's visions were recorded like symptoms. If one dreamed of falling, it meant the body was overheated. Of flying, that vapors had risen to the brain. But some dreams revealed deeper wounds. Letters from patients to their doctors survive on papyrus. Brief, poignant notes describing nights filled with recurring images. Lost children, empty rooms, unfinished journeys. The doctors responded with herbs and logic in equal measure. "You must unburden your heart," one writes. "Medicine will fail where sorrow is not confessed." There, in the flicker between superstition and science, one sees the beginning of what we might now call therapy. Temples complemented medicine. The sick who could not find rest through herbs turned to Asclepius, bringing offerings and sleeping within sacred precincts. But the priests of those temples also acted as counselors. They listened to the stories the sleepless carried. A man troubled by nightmares was told to reconcile with an estranged friend. A woman grieving was instructed to sing each morning to the rising sun. The divine prescription was often psychological, dressed in ritual form. To the gods, healing meant restoring relationship with others, with self, with the world. The most haunting accounts come from soldiers. Far from home, they wrote of nights when the faces of the dead visited them. The Romans lacked our word for trauma, yet they recognized its shape. Military doctors spoke of imagines nocturnae, night images that disturbed rest. They prescribed structured routine, cleaning weapons, writing letters, reciting verses. The order of these tasks served as scaffolding for the disordered mind. One soldier inscribed on his shield, "By labor comes rest." He meant it literally. Exhaustion as therapy. Women suffered their own species of sleeplessness, often tied to childbirth or solitude. Midwives recommended baths in rosewater, music, and company. Speak softly with her until the eyes grow heavy. One manual advises emotional care counted as treatment. Husbands were told to avoid harshness, to create a kindly atmosphere. The understanding that environment shapes mind was woven through Roman domestic life. The household's peace was itself a form of medicine. Superstition filled the gaps where science faltered. Charms against nightmares circulated like folk songs. A small tablet found near Naples reads, "Sleep, come kindly, evil, stay far." It was meant to be tied around the wrist. Another, inscribed on a scrap of lead, promises protection from wandering thoughts. These objects functioned as physical affirmations, reminders that anxiety could be externalized, set aside, given shape, and therefore distance. In a world without neurology, such gestures were their own psychology. Writers, too, prescribed thought as cure. Seneca advised journaling before bed, reviewing the day, forgiving mistakes, and releasing regret. Let no injury accompany you to your pillow, he wrote. The ritual anticipated cognitive practice by 2 millennia. It acknowledged that memory itself can keep a man awake. By transforming it into words, he made rest a moral exercise. Clear conscience, clear sleep. Marcus Aurelius echoed him, noting that the soul, when ordered, rests like the sea after a storm. The empire's fascination with dreams produced a curious profession, the Honerocritici, interpreters who blended philosophy with medicine. They maintained that recurrent dreams indicated imbalance, and they prescribed not omens, but diets and behavior. A dream of running meant too much heat in the blood. Avoid meat, they said. A dream of drowning meant congestion. Take a purgative. Even the most mystical acts were tethered to physiology. What emerges from their writings is an image of insomnia, not as isolated ailment, but as mirror. It reflected excess, guilt, longing, fear. Healing required the rearrangement of life itself. Galen urged his patients to live with rhythm. Rise early, walk often, eat modestly, speak kindly. The same advice appears in modern clinics under different words. The Roman prescription for sleep was, in essence, the Roman prescription for virtue. At night, in the stillness between torches and dawn, such advice played out quietly across the city. A merchant, remembering his physician's counsel, walked the courtyard counting breaths. A widow whispered to her gods and breathed in the scent of myrtle oil. A soldier hummed the tune of his homeland until fatigue overtook thought. The methods varied, but all sought the same fragile equilibrium, a mind quiet enough to match the body's stillness. Sleep came, or didn't. The city never knew uniform rest, yet the effort itself, the nightly choreography of herb, prayer, reflection, was its own form of hope. To try again each evening was to declare faith in restoration. The Romans believed that no ailment was permanent if balance could be restored. Even the restless heart could one day learn its rhythm. And so their nights unfolded, part ritual, part experiment, carried on beneath the same stars that hang above us now. The vocabulary has changed. The pulse of worry has not. Across centuries, the Roman whisper survives in every bedside struggle, that sleep is not granted by force or formula, but by the slow, deliberate making of peace within oneself. In the quiet hours of the Roman night, medicine gave way to mystery. When herbs failed and philosophy offered no relief, people turned to older forces, half divine, half human, woven deep into the fabric of superstition. The Romans did not draw a firm line between faith and magic. Both were part of the same search for order. Both were answers to the same plea whispered into darkness. Let me sleep. Religion was everywhere, but in the bedroom it became intimate, stripped of grandeur. In the temples, priests performed public rites under sunlight. At home, small altars glowed beside the bed, tended by ordinary hands. A clay lamp, a bowl of milk, a sprig of laurel, offerings so simple they might be overlooked in daylight, yet they carried centuries of belief. To sleep was to enter the realm of unseen powers, and no Roman wished to enter unguarded. The first of those guardians were the Lares and Penates, the household gods who kept watch over hearth and home. Every family, from senators to shoemakers, had them. Their little statues stood in niches near the dining room or in corners of the kitchen, their painted eyes flickering in lamplight. Before bed, people poured drops of wine before them and murmured thanks for safety through another day. Keep our dreams clear, they would say, and our doors closed to harm. It was not doctrine, but dialogue, an ongoing conversation between the living and the divine that sustained the rhythm of domestic life. For protection against nightmares, Romans often invoked Somnus himself. He was not feared, he was entreated. Poppy crowns were placed beside the bed, petals crushed between fingers and sprinkled over pillows. Some wrote his name on strips of linen and tied them around the wrist. These small acts made sleep tangible, as if its god could be persuaded by evidence of devotion. A poet described leaving a cup of wine by the window, in case Somnus grows thirsty on his rounds. In these gestures there was humor, but also humility. Sleep, after all, was never a right. It was a guest one hoped to welcome. Yet other spirits haunted the threshold between sleep and waking. The Lemures, restless dead who wandered at night, troubled those who neglected proper burial or offerings. Once a year, during the festival of Lemuria, families performed rituals to drive them away. Fathers walked barefoot through their houses at midnight, tossing black beans behind them and reciting 9 times, "With these I redeem me and mine." They dared not look back until the 9th repetition was complete, for the spirits were said to follow, collecting the beans as payment. The ceremony ended with the clashing of bronze vessels to frighten any lingering ghosts. To modern ears, it sounds eerie, but it carried comfort, a belief that even the invisible could be negotiated with, that peace could be purchased with ritual. Women preserved another layer of night magic. They tied amulets around their children's necks, tiny phallic charms, carved eyes, little bells that tinkled softly. These were not indecent. They were ancient symbols of vitality, of life repelling death. The sound of the bell was thought to confuse malevolent spirits, distracting them until dawn. Midwives distributed these charms at births, saying, "May he sleep, may he grow." The custom outlived the empire and survives even now in the small bells of Mediterranean cradles. Words themselves carried power. Inscriptions on pottery, rings, and scraps of lead reveal an empire humming with whispered incantations. A common phrase, "Somne veni, somne serenus," sleep, come, sleep serene, appears on household artifacts across Italy. Some added instructions: enter through the right ear, depart at dawn. The notion that words could guide the invisible was no more strange to the Romans than bedtime stories are to us. Speech shaped reality. What was spoken before sleep could influence what followed. Among the educated, magic was both condemned and quietly practiced. Senators wore charms hidden beneath their togas. Physicians included prayers among their prescriptions. Even emperors were not immune. Augustus was said to keep a seal engraved with a sleeping figure and the motto "Tranquillus in nocte." It was meant to ward off anxiety. but it also revealed a universal truth. Power did not protect anyone from restlessness. The crossroads between religion and magic produced a whole profession. The magistri, or wise women, they moved through neighborhoods selling potions and spells, half respected, half feared. To cure sleeplessness, they mixed herbs with ritual, chanting over steaming bowls of water. Let the eyes close as the petals close, they murmured, staring with twigs of olive. Their remedies were sensual, smoke curling, water dripping, the slow rhythm of voice and motion. The act of watching them could itself be hypnotic. Archaeologists have found little figurines of such women, seated with jars and scrolls, proof that their image lingered in the imagination, even after their names were forgotten. Christianity, as it spread, absorbed and transformed many of these customs. The new faith encouraged prayer rather than spell, but the rhythm remained. Early Christian Romans recited psalms before sleep, invoking angels instead of household gods. One prayer from the 4th century begins, "Grant us peaceful rest, O Lord, while we keep watch in our hearts." It is almost indistinguishable in tone from the older invocations to Somnus. The substance had changed, the longing had not. For the poor, rituals required neither theology nor expense. A cup of water beside the bed, a handful of herbs on the sill, a whispered wish for morning. These were enough. A fragment of graffiti found in an insula reads, "Sleep, guard us, thieves, pass by." It is a prayer to no god in particular, just a plea offered to the night itself. The city listened or didn't, but the act of speaking it gave comfort. Even nature had its omens. An owl's call foretold sleeplessness. A dog's howl demanded the lighting of a lamp. Falling stars were said to carry away dreams. Those who saw them closed their eyes quickly to keep their own from escaping. The Romans' relationship with the unseen was not fear, but familiarity. The supernatural was as domestic as the hearth, a companion to be appeased rather than exorcised. In private moments, rituals turned tender. Lovers separated by distance sent each other tokens, a ribbon, a carved gem, believing it would bind their dreams together. "Meet me in sleep," wrote one woman to her husband serving in Gaul, "for there the roads are short." In such lines, magic became metaphor for love, the hope that thought could bridge absence when the body could not. All these beliefs, solemn, playful, desperate, served the same purpose, to turn the uncontrollable into something manageable. Insomnia was a riddle posed by the gods, and ritual was humanity's attempt to answer. Whether it worked was less important than the calm it brought. The repetition of words, the scent of burning herbs, the gentle sound of bells. These were lullabies in disguise, methods of anchoring the mind. And when the final lamp was lowered, when smoke curled upward and mingled with the night, the city slept within its web of faith and superstition. From marble villas to crumbling apartments, the same small gestures repeated themselves. Wine poured, prayers murmured, shams placed on pillows. The dark was never truly empty. It was filled with whispers, hopes, and invisible guardians pacing softly through the corridors of Rome. Rome dreamed even when it was awake. Its artists and poets turned the sleeplessness of their age into beauty, shaping words and stone to echo the strange hush between midnight and dawn. What medicine tried to cure, art sought to understand. In frescoes, on tablets, in lines of verse scratched by lamplight, the city recorded the sound of its own heartbeat at night. Painters gave form to the invisible in the villas of Pompeii, and Herculaneum walls glowed with scenes of twilight, shepherds lying beneath trees, women drifting towards sleep, gods reclining on clouds, thick with poppies. These were not simply decorations, they were visual prayers. Each brushstroke promised peace to the viewer, a reminder that calm existed somewhere, even if only within paint. Bedrooms were filled with these images. To wake in darkness and see somnus hovering above a sleeper, wings folded, was to feel watched over by serenity itself. Sculptors, too, found poetry in repose. Marble effigies of the dead were carved with eyes closed, lips softened, hands resting lightly on chests. In death, they were shown sleeping, their features untroubled, as though they had finally found what the living could not. The Romans surrounded themselves with such reminders that rest was not weakness, but victory. To master stillness was a kind of art. Writers turned insomnia into metaphor. Propertius confessed to nights haunted by love. Sleep flees me, and the bed holds only the imprint of her name. Ovid compared wakefulness to exile, describing his thoughts pacing the room like prisoners. Horace, older and calmer, urged moderation, a light meal, a clear conscience, and no worries after the lamps are out. Even in humour, the theme returned. Petronius described a character who tried every trick to sleep, counting coins, arguing with his slave, drinking warm wine, and failed, concluding that rest belonged only to the ignorant. Laughter softened despair, but the sleepless reader recognized himself in the jest. For philosophers, night was both torment and teacher. Cicero wrote his treatises during bouts of wakefulness, admitting that the hours before dawn were when reason spoke most clearly. Seneca, gazing at the stars from his garden, found in Insomnia a model of virtue, endurance without complaint. The mind that cannot rest must learn to be content with wakefulness, he said. Yet even he longed for surrender, describing the rare moment when sleep descends like a friend long absent. Their words became guidebooks for those who suffered, reminders that even restlessness could be lived with dignity. The poets of later centuries transformed these meditations into music. Statius, writing under Domitian, filled his verses with the noises of the city at night, the clatter of carriages, the distant cries of watchmen, the sigh of fountains. His Insomnia became portraiture. The whole world sleeps, he wrote, and only the poet keeps vigil, measuring silence with his pen. He did not resent it. To him, sleeplessness was proof of awareness, the cost of imagination. Even historians wove the rhythm of night into their chronicles. Tacitus described emperors unable to sleep, pacing palaces as fires burned in distant provinces. Their wakefulness mirrored the empires. The machine of Rome never stopped. It merely shifted from daylight to torchlight. Insomnia became a symbol of power, of minds too burdened to rest. Yet beneath the grandeur lay fragility. The sleepless ruler and the sleepless laborer shared the same haunted hours, separated only by walls. The theatre embraced this duality. Comedies often began with insomniac lovers. Tragedies ended with haunted kings. The audience, sitting under open sky, recognized themselves in the actors' fatigue. Plays were performed by torchlight, their shadows enormous on the stone. When the final scene closed and silence fell, the night beyond the stage felt suddenly immense. Art blurred with life. The city itself became the stage on which countless insomnias played out. Music soothed where words could not. The lyre's slow notes echoed through courtyards, drifting from one house to another. Certain melodies were believed to charm sleep, particularly those in the Lydian mode. Poets compared them to soft rain, to wind moving through reeds. Musicians played until their fingers slowed, until the last chord faded into the dark. For those who listened, the sound lingered long after. It was not quite silence, not quite song, something between, like the space between waking and dream. Even architecture carried this awareness. The great libraries and baths were designed for contemplation, their acoustics tuned for whisper and echo. The baths of Caracalla, centuries later, would still hold that feeling of endless hum, footsteps dissolving in vastness. Those who entered such spaces spoke softer without knowing why. The Romans built calm into stone. They learned to carve tranquility. Perhaps the most intimate expressions of their sleeplessness survive not in art, but in fragments of correspondence. Wax tablets found in the ruins of Pompeii bear lines written in hurried, uneven hand. It is late, and I cannot stop thinking. Another reads simply, "May the night be short." These sentences, unadorned, reveal a private world beneath the marble. They remind us that insomnia was not confined to poets and rulers. It belonged to every rank, every street. For all their remedies, Romans seemed to accept that wakefulness had its own value. The night was time for thought, for confession, for writing letters one would never send. The empire's bureaucracy depended on it. Scribes working by lamplight, copying decrees long after the sun had set. The very records that allow history to remember them were products of sleepless labor. Without insomnia, much of Rome's memory might have remained unwritten. In the end, their art and their anguish became inseparable. The same imagination that built aqueducts and epics also built its own unrest. To think deeply was to disturb oneself. To feel keenly was to lose rest. The Romans lived close to that truth. They built temples to gods of sleep, but they also immortalized the beauty of waking under stars, too bright to ignore. When we read their words now, the rhythm of their nights returns, the scratch of stylus on wax, the faint sigh of someone turning on a couch, the pause before extinguishing the lamp. Their insomnia has become our inheritance, transmitted not as almond, but as empathy. We know the feeling, we recognize the hour. 2,000 years dissolve, and we share the same vigil. Somewhere in that long lineage, art did what medicine could not. It made peace with wakefulness by naming it, painting it, setting it to verse Rome transformed restlessness into meaning. The sleepless mind, once burden, became mirror, and in that mirror, under the eternal moon that watched the Tiber and still watches us, the empire found its truest reflection, not in conquest or marble, but in the quiet endurance of those who lay awake, wondering, waiting for the mercy of sleep. As the empire aged, its nights grew longer. The same unease that once haunted individuals began to spread through the body of Rome itself, a collective restlessness, a sleepless empire turning endlessly on its couch of marble and dust. Prosperity had bred noise. Conquest had bred worry. The calm of earlier centuries gave way to a fever that no physician could cure. The city changed first. Once, lamps burned evenly along the streets, their light a sign of order. Now, many gutters lay dark. The aqueducts still whispered, but their water no longer sang with confidence. Cracks had appeared, unseen yet widening. The night patrols grew lazy or corrupt. Tavern songs echoed louder. Longer, the empire that had once worshipped discipline and rhythm now lived by distraction. Citizens still prayed to Somnus, but with voices more pleading than assured. Writers sensed it. The late poets describe a city that cannot rest. Ammanus tells of senators pacing their courtyards, suspicious of neighbors and guards alike. Chroniclers note emperors who slept little, waking to paranoia rather than inspiration. Even Constantine, praised for his faith, was said to spend nights kneeling in prayer until exhaustion claimed him. Religion had replaced philosophy, but the anxiety remained. Faith had not cured fear. It had merely given it new language. In the provinces, soldiers lay awake, listening for threats in the dark. The frontiers were restless, the borders no longer clear. Wind moaned through the watchtowers, and every rustle of grass seemed like an approaching army. In letters carved onto tablets from the Rhine, officers speak of broken nights, of men who stared into the fire rather than close their eyes. The insomnia of empire had become literal, a sleepless guard watching over fading dominion. The physicians of the 4th century wrote of exhaustion as the empire's new disease. They called it fatigaci animi, the tiredness of the soul. It was not cured by poppy or honeyed wine. It came from too much change, too much memory. The Romans had built a world so large that it could no longer sleep. The noise of administration, the movement of armies, the endless counting of taxes, all continued through the dark. The empire's pulse never slowed, only weakened. Among the common people, the old rituals persisted, but lost conviction. Offerings were still made to household gods, but more out of habit than faith. Lamps still burned, but their flames trembled in draughts from broken shutters. The songs sung to children were older than the singers themselves. Sleep, my little one, the empire is tired. One lullaby went. It was not poetry, but truth. The greatness that had filled the world was now a hum in the background, fading like a receding heartbeat. In villas along the coasts, retired generals and officials wrote memoirs by candlelight. They spoke of better days, of order, of purpose. I cannot rest, one fragment reads, for I dream of legions that no longer exist. They described their nights as campaigns against thought, each hour an enemy that would not yield. Many sought solace in Christianity, which promised eternal rest in another world. The very word requiem became a prayer for both sleep and death, an echo of the ancient link between the two. Meanwhile, the cities themselves began to mirror the insomnia of their rulers. Fires broke out more often. Unchoker, the streets, once patrolled by the vigils, filled with thieves and wanderers, night no longer meant safety, but uncertainty. For centuries, darkness had been managed. Now it was wild again. The same civilization that had tamed the elements found itself haunted by them. The night air, once cooled by fountains, now smelled of smoke and decay. The philosophers were gone, replaced by bishops and hermits. Yet even they wrote of sleeplessness. The desert fathers, living in caves or on pillars, embraced wakefulness as devotion. They refused the comfort of sleep, believing that the soul should remain vigilant until salvation. Blessed are those who wake, said one, for they shall see the dawn that does not end. The insomnia that had once been curse became virtue. Rome's restlessness turned inward, spiritualized. It was a strange kind of peace, one found through denial rather than surrender. But among the ordinary faithful, the longing for gentle rest remained. Early Christian hymns carried the same rhythm as the old invocations to Somnus. Grant us peace through the dark hours, Lord, and guard us till morning. The gods had changed names, yet the plea was eternal. People still feared nightmares, still hung charms over cradles, still lit lamps against the unknown. The world had shifted, but the heart had not. As the empire weakened, its nights grew quieter. The markets closed earlier, the theatres darkened, the Tiber's current sounded louder than the voices of men. In the ruins of temples, bats replaced worshippers, and the wind whispered through broken columns like breath through sleeping lips. Even ruin, in time, has its hush. The sleepless empire was finally tiring. When barbarian armies reached the city, they came not with noise, but with inevitability. Fires burned for days, and smoke veiled the stars. Those who survived described a strange stillness afterward, as though the world itself had exhaled. Rome had lived too long without rest. Now it slept in ashes, and yet, as centuries turned, new cities rose from its dreams. The insomnia of empire gave way to the sleep of history, deep and vast, but not complete. For ruins do not truly sleep, they remember. Travelers in later ages wrote of wandering the forum by moonlight, hearing whispers in the stones. The fountains were dry, yet they seemed to murmur. The city breathes, one pilgrim said. It is only resting. The insomnia of Rome had become memory, the restless echo of all that once refused to fade. And somewhere within that echo lingered the same human sound, a sigh in the dark, a prayer for peace, the flutter of consciousness before surrender. The empire was gone, but its longing for sleep endured. It lived in every monastery bell that marked the hours, in every scholar reading by candlelight, in every heart that still beat faster than the night around it. The story of Roman insomnia was never just about sleeplessness. It was about a civilization learning, again and again that rest cannot be conquered by force, nor bought by power. It can only be found in balance, in humility, in the quiet acceptance of limits. And as Rome finally closed its weary eyes, it taught the world one last lesson, that even empires, like people, must one day learn to sleep. The empire drifts now, weightless, its heartbeat slow as the tide. The marble that once gleamed under torchlight lies cool beneath the moon. Grass grows through cracks where senators once walked, and the fountains murmur to no one. The noise, the conquest, the sleepless energy of centuries has thinned into a single endless hush. Somewhere, perhaps a night wind still moves through the ruins, curling through broken arches and empty doorways. It carries no command, no burden, only the faint scent of stone and time. What was once restless has become still. The city that never slept finally learned silence. In that silence, the old lamps seem to flicker again in memory. The small flames in thousands of rooms, the gestures of hands preparing for bed, the breath of lovers and workers and scholars as they surrendered to night. Each life a momentary glow, each dream a drifting spark. They rise, they fade, they join the great darkness that is not absence but rest. The Roman insomnia dissolves into something gentler now, a slow pulse beneath the earth. The fears, the ambitions, the prayers to somnus, all folded into sleep's long archive. The gods have no temples left, but their echoes remain in the simple rhythm of breathing. Even the ghosts, weary of wandering, have lain down. If you listen closely, you can almost hear them, the steady exhale of a world at peace, the whisper of poppy petals falling. The fountains of Rome still flow, though few are awake to hear them. Their water repeats the same soft lesson. It murmured to emperors and beggars alike, that nothing is truly lost, only resting. So let the city rest, let its stones dream. The lamps are out, the air is cool, and the world has grown quiet enough for sleep. Somewhere beyond the walls, dawn waits patiently, but there is no need to rush toward it. Breathe slowly. The night is kind, the story is finished, and at last, after 2,000 years, Rome sleeps.